Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Virtual Design Festival. This conversation has been programmed in conjunction with my residency at the Design Museum, where I explored pregnancy, childbirth, postpartum recovery, and motherhood. And it's been kindly supported by Dezeen and the Design Museum. And before I give any further insights about my project, I'd like to introduce the incredible panel that I've got with me today. I have Dr. Shehnaz Suterwalla, who is a design writer and critic, who also teaches at the RCA. She works on the radical politics of the body, exploring material and visual culture as well as literature. I also have Dr. Catharine Rossi, who is an associate professor at Kingston University, and she's currently co-editing a book called Postcraft, due to be published this year, which explores contemporary crafts. And she also co-curated an exhibition which started at the Vitro Design Museum, and it's called Designing Club Culture from the 1960s until today, and hopefully soon it's gonna find its home at the V&A Dundee. And I also have Abe Rogers, whom I met quite a few months ago at the RCA when he was leading the interior design studio and I was doing my master's in architecture. Abe is the founder of Abe Rogers Design since 2004. And he's been exploring his design imagination through his practice by creating unique interiors and interactive spaces, as well as product design, rich in color and form. So our topic is the non-universal experience of pregnancy and childbirth through an object and spatial prism, and the hospital setting as a reimagined area of design.
So thank you, Stiliyana, for inviting me to be part of this conversation today. I don't have particular expertise around the design of maternity and motherhood, but on becoming a mother a couple of years ago, it definitely really, kind of changed everything, but including in that everything was my understanding of design and how design could respond to questions of motherhood. And so in thinking about objects that I might want to speak about today, I chose a couple of objects that actually were nominated for the Design of the Year 2019, so the current exhibition on at the museum that we can't all go and see. And the first one that that's up on screen is the Lea Pregnancy Test. And this is a really interesting object. It's the very first flushable and biodegradable pregnancy test. And it was designed by two female American designers called Bethany Edwards and Anna Simpson. And I thought this was a really valuable project to include, not only for its kind of sustainable credentials, but I think because it shows that as an area of design, this really has been overlooked. So the pregnancy test, which millions of women take in the UK alone, let alone, kind of worldwide, the one that you buy in the shops is a wand that you pee on, essentially. And that first originated in the 1980s, and it hasn't really changed much since then, apart from becoming more technological with the kind of digital screen in the early noughties. So I think it's the lack of attention to that object that in itself is quite interesting and speaks to a kind of absence of design in this area. So what these two designers did was that they paid attention to the needs of women, but also understood this as a bigger issue, hence the kind of sustainable aspect. So this is, it's made from a plant fiber, a bit like you would get in toilet paper. So you can, as I say, you can flush it away. And that's not only beneficial in terms of avoiding landfill, but also because it becomes much more private. So if you don't want to reveal that you are or aren't pregnant or even thinking about it, then for the first time you can actually conceal that completely from anybody. So I think it's a really valuable object. So the second object that I wanted to talk about is another object included in the Design of the Year nomination, and actually it's one that I nominated, and that's called the LV breast pump. So the LV breast pump, interestingly, also has a woman behind it, and that's not a coincidence. So the company is LV, which was founded by Tanya Bola. And this is it's kind of billed as the world's first silent wearable breast pump. And it's hands-free, it's battery operated, and it's designed to fit inside a nursing bra. And the key difference for that, for those who haven't had to go through this experience, or in many ways maybe didn't have the opportunity to go through this experience, is that you've got rid of all the cables and plug sockets that quite literally tie you to one place while you're pumping milk for your baby. And I think it's another really important product, because we know the importance of breastfeeding. So the World Health Organization recommends babies are breastfed exclusively for the first 6 months, but the UK has one of the lowest rates around that. And actually, that I was reading today that more than 8 out of 10 women actually regret how early they stop giving breast milk to their babies. But sometimes that isn't a choice that you have. So you have to go back to work, for example, and therefore you don't really have the means at work to pump milk, or all these other kind of responsibilities that women have that prevent that. So I think it's another really interesting product from a company that is all about femtech, about designing products for women and for women's needs. So the final project that I wanted to mention is not a product, but actually it currently exists as an Instagram account, and it's called Designing Motherhood. And it's set up by 2 design historians, so 2 people in my field, and they're called Michelle Miller-Fisher and Amber Winnick. And this is an Instagram project that actually is the kind of providing the seeds for a book and exhibition that I think are going to come out next year. And I think it's really wonderful, because it not only brings to the fore issues of motherhood and how that's been designed in all sorts of ways, from the design of baby monitors to prams and nappy packaging, and the representation of pregnant women and mothers in our culture, but also it's really avowedly intersectional. So it thinks about gender in conjunction with issues of race, of disability, of economic inequality. So it's, as a design historian, I think it's really interesting for thinking about the subject as being about advocacy and also activism. So those are the 3 projects that I wanted to mention.
Thank you. I will start by saying that I think we all know that birth is everywhere, socially marked life crisis event that is consciously shaped and socially patterned. And I think from these images, one could see that birth is its complex form of the pre, intra, and postpartum events that result in a new human being falls within the medical domain. And it's part of this cosmopolitan scientific medicine. And by this, I refer to the interchangeable terms of Western, biomedical, scientific, and modern. I also believe that childbirth is an event of great interaction and complexity, where people know how to do it, but my question is whether they have the elements of offerings needed for them to do what their instincts require them to do. And I think the performance of birth giving is a system specific, conducted by the obstetric convenience rather than working around the mother-to-be centeredness. And these 4 images were taken during the birth of my daughter. And the first one on the top left is the antenatal ward, where I was admitted for induction because she was 2 weeks late, and she was supposed to be born on 20th of December 2015, but she arrived on 3rd of January 2016, which is the last day of my 42nd gestational week. And the 42nd week is in a way perceived to be the very last moment when women are allowed to give birth. And I was trying to be induced with all sorts of artificial oxytocin type medicines, but the baby started overreacting. Her heart was going to absolutely explode. It was accelerating, so they had to remove all the medicine. And then on 3rd of January, a really lovely midwife came to me and she said, "Come on, follow me, you're about to give birth." And I didn't have any signs whatsoever about me going into labor. So I went to the second on the top right corner image, which is this cream neutral color palette environment where my waters were broken. And this is when hell literally began for me. And soon after that, I was moved to the image on the left, on the bottom, which is kind of more, not aggressive, but much more defined blue color, the very typical NHS blue, where, as you can see, I only had a mattress on the floor and the bath, which I had to give birth on. And yeah, this is where my daughter was born. And then maybe half an hour after she was born, I was moved to this 5-star view of Big Ben, but unfortunately it didn't feel as exquisite, because I was in a room with joined by another maybe 6 newly become mothers with their families, their babies, paper curtains which were really thin, and yeah, it didn't feel private at all. As part of my research during the residency, I visited the maternity wards at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, and it's quite a wealthy borough, hence a very wealthy hospital. But the images are from 2019, just after they had undergone a renovation of the spaces. But again, one can see that the supporting product design remains dated and not progressive, as opposed to the advanced birth landscape. And there are methods which are used to hide the masculine presence of technological equipment behind cupboards, but I'm unsure whether this is satisfactory to meet the bodily functions and metamorphosis during labor and delivery which a woman's body experiences. I think it's very important to be in a calm environment, so your new cortex can entirely focus on the act of giving birth. As a result of my research and investigation of the designs existing to support the most uncontrollable alien possession over one's body during labor, which as seen on the previous images, designs don't really exist for such stage of labor. This is how the labor seer was born. It is designed for birthing people who do go into labor, because there are many people that just go directly into for a cesarean, or they give birth outside the hospital or in a taxi. There are all sorts of stories. It aims to be used as an empowerment tool through a series of female-centered design decisions. The SIA introduces a feeling of tranquility and eases the labor, as well as provides this comfort by its progressive design during this time of uncertainty and extreme discomfort. It allows the parturient person to prepare for the expulsion phase, responding to the demands of the maternal body and its instincts, and also it's designed to be continuously evolving, so it can accommodate the different mammalian aptitudes that one could experience. And the parturition stool is in a way designed as a manifesto and a statement against the historic lithotomy position, which works around the convenience of the hospital personnel, but in my opinion, it's totally against the biological and gravitational needs for both mother and baby. Squatting is proven to encourage the baby's expulsion, and the stool offers comfort by respecting the mother's unique temperaments and physicalities. It also is designed as a tandem, so a second participant can join the act from behind, providing support. And of course, the participant status should not evoke motivation for questioning, but it should rather be seen as providing the resources for constructing the birth as a sensible event. And also the supporter's role are both verbal and physical in the form of remedial efforts. I think I really enjoyed having my partner next to me, stroking me, giving me water, as well as just being there as a presence. I think that was quite encouraging. And the final element is the solace chase, which works for postpartum recovery use. It's been designed to create a secure cocoon for parent and baby to bond in comfort and privacy immediately after birth. It also is intended to be used after vaginal birth, after cesarean, after any kind of medical intervention, such as forceps delivery or vacuums, as well as post-elective abortion and miscarriage. It aims to have a relaxing effect on the maternal body after it's undergone the trauma of giving birth. Also, I think it's an empowering element, celebrating mothers and their own decisions, ownership and conduct over their procreativity. I think through materiality, form and function, it in a way celebrates womanhood as a whole. And eventually, Ultima Thule is the name that I chose for the triptych and the environment, which is currently exhibited at the Design Museum. Ultima Thule is a name for the trans-Neptunian object compiled from the data obtained by NASA's New Horizons team. The planetesimals are a phenomenon of two distant objects, one smaller and one larger, which are kind of connected through their main axis. And in a way, this is my metaphor of pregnancy, because it's a body within a body, yet two constituent but always distinct elements. And Ultima Thule as a whole interrogates the design landscape within the hospital setting. And through this project, of course, I recognize that childbirth is not a monolithic event. It varies from person to person, hence the flexible natures of the designs that I have proposed. And also it's a space where pain is mitigated and the power of the maternal body is celebrated. It honors the varying experiences of procreativity in a safe and comforting environment. So I'll just pass over to Shehnaz.
Thank you. That was so interesting. Thank you for sharing those images and also your stories. The image that I have brought or suggested is this little nappy, and this is a nappy by Huggies, as you can see, which has been designed for preterm babies. And the reason that I suggested this was because I myself had a preterm baby. So I have 3 children, and my first child was preterm and the other 2 went to term. And it was only after I'd had the second one that I knew what the idea of a normal, quote unquote, versus pre-normal pregnancy and experience of birthing and experience of postpartum mothering, what that might look like or how it might be compared. And so I wanted to bring this in because when my baby was born, he was born at 3.5 pounds, which is tiny. And he was born at 31 weeks, which meant that when I first saw him, his skin was translucent and it was still covered in all of this tiny hair. He was put into an incubator and he was given a gastronasal tube because the sucking reflex doesn't come in till 33 weeks and he was only 31 weeks. And also he was only 3.5 pounds and you have to have a certain birth weight to be able to suck. So neither of those had been established yet. The only thing that he did have or was given as a designed object as soon as he was born was this little nappy. And it wasn't put on by me in the first instance because I was in a state of shock when he was first given a nappy. I think the midwife or the doctor would have done it for him. I don't even know. But he was given this nappy as his first designed object, and then he was put into an incubator as his second designed object. And as I say, given the gastronasal tube as his third designed object. And he was put in a neonatal ward, and he was there for between about 5 and 6 weeks as he got his birth weight up and as he started to develop the sucking reflex so that he could latch on. And so my experience of the designed world through my entry into motherhood in those first early weeks was very much about all the things that didn't work or didn't fit. My baby was so small that a normal nappy wouldn't have fit. He was so small that ordinary clothes would not have fit. And the list goes on. And so in the first instances, everything was about customizing, almost like a DIY, around shaping objects to fit him because he was so small. In the first couple of weeks, actually, we were not allowed to handle him because, as I said, his skin was so translucent that it was difficult to touch him, and it would have potentially been quite painful because the skin is still quite raw. But as he got older, which in my case was about him coming to term, and like negative numbers on a number line, you're counting down backwards to term. It's very funny. I guess, you know, when I had my daughter, who's my second child, you just say, oh, she's 1 month or 3 months. But with my son, we were counting weeks and saying he's 32 weeks now, he's 33 weeks now. So we were counting gestationally. When we got to the stage where we could do skin-to-skin contact, that was quite a breakthrough, because that was the time at which a whole new set of designed objects came into play, in that he was removed from the incubator and he was now being swaddled. He was being put against us, and so the fibres and fabrics of our materials that we were wearing became very important. And to the ideas of privacy that have already been mentioned, I wasn't breastfeeding yet because he wasn't old enough to latch on, but I was thinking about how I could have this skin-to-skin contact. And so for me, some of the very early designed objects were about how I could maintain my privacy in a public, by which I mean a shared neonatal ward with many other parents and doctors and nurses, how I could maintain that while doing skin-to-skin contact with my baby. And I mention this because, of course, you never think about any of these things if you are not anticipating having a preterm baby. And there was nothing to indicate that I would have a preterm baby. I had a normal pregnancy, and I went into emergency labour under emergency circumstances. So emotionally, as well as resource-wise in terms of my baby shopping, I didn't have anything ready or prepared. I didn't even have a baby bag when I went in the middle of the night after my waters broke. So we were literally jerry-rigging stuff. And I just wanted to mention the way that a sense of failure starts to become embedded in that process. And on reflection, looking back, one of the things that's very interesting to me is the way that the designing of these spaces reinforces that sense of failure if you can't match up to the idea of normal or normalcy, whatever that might mean in a particular context for anyone. And how ideas of failure and privacy are also co-constituent, actually, because in my culture, I come from an Indian and Pakistani culture, a lot of the first bits of tacit knowledge that were passed to me were through my mother and my mother-in-law. But they didn't have access to the baby because there was lots of guarding around who could touch the baby and who couldn't touch the baby, who could handle equipment and who wasn't qualified to handle equipment. So even something as basic as this little nappy that you see, in the first instance, the midwife didn't necessarily feel confident to hand the baby to his grandmother in order to put this nappy on. It was all too small and it was all too fragile and he was too delicate. And so actually, I also felt that I missed out on the processes, cultural processes, that would have created another set of norms for me had these things not all been in play. And so I share that just to open up the conversation about the way that we think about individuality, but also collectivity in these spaces.
Thank you, Shehnaz. That's fascinating.
It's a really fascinating story. And I think we've been looking at a project in St. Thomas's, actually, in the neonatal unit. And looking at what you describe as many situations which need some type of design solution, not an over-designed solution, but something that gives you both intimacy and security, which gives you privacy, but at times to share. And I think there's such specific things that you're going through. And when you're inside a hospital, it's very hard to hide from the machines. There's this feeling of medical takeover. And when the doctors in their knights in shining armor, in their suits, arrive with these air machines and these beds and these very big mechanical interfaces. And it's how we can start to create kind of humanistic languages that helps us in between, gives us a clue of where to go. One of the rooms which I found the most complicated in a way was the breast pump room, where you go in and these are women like yourself who've never been able to breastfeed their child. But at the moment they are, the one way they can connect with them is through pumping their milk and then returning it to the child, which seems to connect the first together. And how can you create a room where you're going through this very powerful intimate experience that you can give enough sharedom and enough privacy at the same time in kind of equal balance. Obviously being male, I've not had any children, but I have I've witnessed 3 children being burned and seen very different approaches from doctors, from midwives, from the very, as I say, the medical takeover, which almost wants to ignore the human body and purely see it as a procedure, or the much more holistic from the midwife, who really want to encourage a level of engagement, which is obviously much more human and poetic. My practice really tries to look at how we can create engagement within spaces through design interventions, whether that is we're working in St Mary's Paediatrics, we're looking at a project in both Charing Cross Women in Breast Cancer and St Thomas's prenatal, which are all, these such important moments where design can really help, I think, move people forward. So I just thought I would talk briefly through a Maggie Centre that we completed not long ago. And of course, Maggie's is a place for people to come and escape the hospital. And cancer is the opposite end of the spectrum from birth in many ways. So less and less is it fatal. And certainly those that it is fatal, it's really getting extended. But you go through these very strong medical interventions, you lose sense of your body, you're told you've got cancer in a corridor, everything is very brush, and then you come to these places where everybody is welcome, and where really it's about design. So in a way, the first role of the architect or the designer is to create a beacon. So the building becomes a beacon. I'm here, come and see me, come and interact with me. And then once you arrive, it's allowing you to feel welcome and making you feel celebrated and move through. So we have this collection of terracotta dug from the tiles that wrap around the building. But then as soon as you enter it, the first thing you touch is wood, and every wooden handle has been hand carved. And so you're going through this sensory dialogue with the door handle. And then we punch up skylights everywhere, so we can really marinate people in daylight, so they can appreciate the circadian rhythm. Because in hospitals, you really lose sight of daylight. And you go into the bathrooms, and they're full of, they're polished plaster and these really vibrant colours with daylight streaming in. Because Maggie's talks about the bathroom being a place to escape to, becoming a kind of chapel in these moments of sadness. So, of course, they need to work as toilets, but they also need to become these escapes to an extent. You sit in the yellow bench, and you have sunlight pouring on your head. You go into these. It's about making room to expand and to so where you feel very small, you feel very big. We go to these rooms which are quite dark, but with large windows looking through to this garden. Where you can really contemplate and lose yourself in your thoughts. So really playing with different colours and different experiences. So it becomes an architecture of many stories. And then you come into this large communal space, which is wrapped around by this coral, by this coral ribbon that really supports you, where you can come together and sit around a table and talk about tea, or talk about childbirth, or talk about these anchoring subjects. I suppose it's the importance of the dining table, be it in the breast pump room or be it in the Maggie's kitchen, creating these spaces where we can come together and share our stories, as cultures have done for years. Because however brilliant medical interventions are, we need to be treated as humans, and we need to be supported by the architecture. We need to be supported by the words, by the staff, and by the materials. And I think in Maggie's we became very interested in using these very organic materials like terracotta of the outside and the inside, like wood, using really everything being hand finished, polished plaster, trying to avoid too much kind of hefty mechanical intervention. Of course, mechanics are everywhere, but so there's an emotion to the material palette. There's an emotion to the light, and I think and there's always this ability that you can always see out of the building. Because I think to feel free, you need to be able to see ways out. You need to be able to see different. And the other thing about seeing out is that we have this amazing garden designed by Pete Ordoff, which is kind of growing all around the building, and that really gives this feeling of life. And however grim you're feeling inside from the news you've heard, you're much more likely to be able to lift your spirits in these types of very these types of environments, which are playful and colour. I just really briefly want to talk about a different project, which is in Thailand, which is almost the opposite, which is a festival. And I suppose the reason for me this is interesting, and it goes back to the hospital, is it's finding ways of creating architecture which is much less heavy. It's almost looking at how we can dissolve the layers of architecture. So, by shifting earth and creating a collection of umbrellas, we can create shelter, and that shelter celebrates. By using plastic water tanks, borrowing them for temporary and wrapping them in bamboo, we can make little cocoons that you can float about. And I suppose it's trying to look at this notion of well-being from a really integral place, which is what we're trying to do in hospitals. But we have to find ways to build in less concrete, to make things feel more ephemeral, particularly in hospitals. And it's such a hard fight between having stuff that is 1,000% repellent of every germ in the world, but also being able to create stuff which has texture and warmth. So I suppose that is really is my position, and maybe we should open up and have a four-way conversation as we're all top of each other.
Thank you.
So interesting to hear your terms of coming, of your stories of coming, the 32-week baby, to imagine this tiny baby and the emotions that one must go through, and the
31-week, yeah.
And how can design become, I suppose, a third help, a third support? Yes,
and the thing is that the doctors are amazing. I was entirely in the hands of my doctors, as was my baby, and they were incredible. And I had nothing but complete dependence on them. And I found them incredibly reassuring. I just wanted them around me the whole time, and I wanted them around my baby the whole time to make sure everything was okay. The thing that becomes difficult to navigate is how everybody then inhabits this communal space. And that's what I think is so interesting about what you've described, Abe, when you talk about the community that you're trying to build for your spaces. I think that's something that's really resonated with me and my own story.
I mean, people going through such traumas, we really need to wrap our arms around them. If we can't wrap our arms around, maybe we can wrap our buildings around.
Yeah. But also that use of light and windows. I mean, I gave birth in the summer of 2018, which you might remember was hot for several months, unbelievably hot. And the hospital, which I stayed in for a few days, I just couldn't open a window, and I wasn't allowed to go outside. And all I had was this I was right next to the window, but I couldn't see out of it because it was frosted, and I couldn't open it. And all I wanted was some fresh air. I mean, obviously I got outside and realized there was no fresh air, but just that kind of, you need something that is what you can breathe, and the kind of a sense of a kind of a room that's part of the world as well as cocooned off from it, I think. From COVID, the importance of fresh air and opening windows in these endless office buildings, and I'm not sure, I mean, where the Royal College used to be one or two windows that you could open if you knew the building where, and they slowly got locked and closed away. But being able to naturally ventilate our buildings is so important. I mean, we always try to design
the experience first, and then wrap the architecture around it, because, you know, which I think is the reverse to many people who want to create these big objects of splendor, and then the interior becomes the leftover. But it's the interior that we really inhabit, so it's so important to make that work.
I mean, I really like the fact that you spoke about loos and bathrooms, because of course, when you give birth or when you're not well, you spend a lot of time in those particular rooms, right? And for some reason, they're always a cubicle on the side, or they're sort of separate somehow. And I think
leftover spaces too often.
Right, but it's absolutely holistically part of the whole process of bodily change that I think certainly needs to be thought about differently. Absolutely. It was really nice to see your vibrant colours and polished porcelain.
Yeah.
In itself actually is reassuring, and I'm smiling, but I'm also saying that seriously, that I think you mentioned COVID, but I think, you know, there's something about the idea of cleanliness and hygiene, and also all of those functions that you go through when you're going through a delivery, a birthing process, where your body, it's matter over mind as opposed to mind over matter, and we just need to make sure that those places are really integrated.
I think all medicine is matter, you know, in the way the body works much better if it's happier. And I think smiling and laughing is, you know, there's an extraordinary 32-year-old woman who's had quite severe cancer who goes to Maggie's, but whenever I walk into the building, she's laughing. And you know, I'm not saying that's a result of our building, of the Maggie Centre, but it's certainly more likely to happen there than it is to happen in the hospital, which is, you know, tough and airless and full of giant machines and people that know, but don't always know how to hug.
But I also think that this is Maggie Jenks's entire concept, because what you refer to, the corridor, when you find such traumatic news of the termination of your life, finding yourself in a dark space is the last thing you want. And I think the whole concept about Maggie Centers came out from this moment when Maggie Jenks happened to be in this corridor with all these people passing by, talking to her, and all she wanted is to be in this garden-like Eden place, just to take her away from the thoughts of her terminal disease.
And then she runs to the toilet, and the toilet is 2 feet from the floor, the door, and there's no...
Yeah. And I also spent a lot of time in labor in the toilet, because I had my mother and my partner with me in the room, and these are probably the two people that love you the most, and they see you in this severe pain that it was the bathroom was my secret escape.
Also in the nightclub, funny enough.
Yeah.
Well, in a different way, yes. The toilet is the key space in a nightclub. But I also
it could be the beginning of the pregnancy rather than of the pregnancy rather than the end.
In many ways, I mean, I did meet my husband in a nightclub, so you know the seeds were sown many years ago in that place. But I also spent most of my labour in the toilet in my room, because it had a shower, and the benefits of water when you're kind of in pain was something. I mean, I was the cleanest I've ever been, I think. But like
I think that's what we're saying, water, wood, these things, that these kind of very natural elements.
I was intrigued in the colour in your chair, Stiliyana. That purple is so striking.
It actually comes from a project that I did previously as part of my thesis project at the RCA. I designed a series of erotic kit for internal selfies, because I was highly frustrated by the fact that I only had 2 scans. One was at week 12 to tell me that I'm pregnant and that I've got a healthy baby. And the second one was week 20, when you're midway through your pregnancy, to be told the gender of the baby. And after that, between week 20 and week 42 in my case, I didn't have any visual relationship with the baby. You go for the Doppler test where you hear the heartbeat, but you just don't see any any visual appearance of the baby. So I just thought I would combine pleasure with education, and I designed these 3. They're quite beautiful objects with a camera, waterproof camera that can go inside and travel. Not that you can see the baby, but what is really striking is the color palette of the images. They are very similar to, I don't know if you've got this book called The Miracle of Childbirth, where you see all these incredible images of baby in the womb, which looks like the Magellanic Cloud. They look so cosmic. So I think this is how the whole story was connected. And also my journey to motherhood was quite interstellar. I think imagining stars and stargazing was where I really found comfort. So the colors come from the womb and the cosmos. And in a way,
I also think those colours in the form, they slightly dematerialize. So you lose, it becomes less of a industrial design and more of a sculptural form where you don't pick up the precision of where the lines fall, but it's more, which is much more approachable.
Yeah, I also think because what I used for it, I used the medical vinyl. And when you say vinyl, it's really like hard and hostile world, but actually it's really leather-like and quite elastic. So it was really easy to upholster. It feels very nice to when you touch it with your skin. I wanted it to feel warm and quite welcoming rather than, I don't know, maybe it's just me. When I hear vinyl, I imagine these really horrible floorings in the bathrooms of Bulgaria.
Sadly, I know quite a lot about vinyl because I have to have been in, and there's sophisticated vinyls that you can use.
I know.
It's very nice. There's no reflective, no glare. We try not to, but in the end, when fucking value engineering comes in or medical, they're the worst. They make you. We propose quadrat, and they always say no. It's got to be vinyl.
Yeah.
And sadly, quadrat doesn't do a vinyl. If they did, I'm sure it'd be quite an interesting material.
Yeah, I wanted to also mention that because both Shehnaz and Abe talked about the situation of COVID, I think it's quite interesting to compare it to. I read yesterday actually that every day 830 women around the world die daily from complications of pregnancy and childbirth, and especially in Africa, I think the annual death of maternal mortality is higher than the peak of Ebola. And I just think it's quite important to think about, like, for example, the NHS nurse who lost her life, and fortunately they preserved her baby's life. It's quite, I think it's an important issue in times of pandemic.
Absolutely. And I mean, from friends and family who are pregnant, that you can't have your support systems with you when you go to scans. Limited in terms of when you're in the hospital, or the kind of vital support systems after you leave hospital. You know, I relied on people coming around to help with breastfeeding, like all these kind of massively personal, like really intimate relationships that you suddenly develop with people, and that obviously can't really happen right now. It must be a very challenging time.
Yeah, when I see pregnant people in the streets, I have to say where one normally would celebrate at the moment, I have to say I feel a bit, I feel for them because it's such a complicated time to do anything in the hospital. I was at the Maggie Centre yesterday, and the cancer patients have had such a horrendous time over the last 3 months.
I also think there's something in new life, right? I mean, you're talking about the importance of nature in the design of the Maggie Centres, and I think, like many people, I think the solace in seeing how kind of life continues, and the amount of bird song, and how life goes on, and the kind of the hope that can be had in kind of new lives like that is kind of empowering, I think, in some ways.
I really like that as well, the fact that there is you talked very much, Abe, about the keeping it human, but equally there was something about the idea of the integration of human and non-human as much more synergetic and harmonious in the space that you've created, which I really liked, which is certainly not something that you get in traditional hospitals, of course, because the strobe lighting would kill any fly that's buzzing around, and as you say, there are no windows, so but it's
and the sounds are all mechanical beeping. There is no
right, and the idea of what is sanitized. So when I look at your spaces, they seem very clean, to use sort of generic word, but we're not seeing the traditional dispensers and washing up sinks and things like that in visible view. And I think that's also something like toilets. You pre-COVID, the only other time when you would constantly be putting alcohol gel on your hands is, of course, when you're in a hospital. That's changed now. But there is something about those entry and exit points where you're constantly sanitizing that is reminding you of this idea of illness, or that there is a vulnerability that is constantly at play, I think. And of course, we don't see those things so much in the new designs, which is absolutely fantastic.
The great things of COVID has been the birdsing. I mean, the birdsing has been so much stronger. And the turtles are so much happier because there's many less boats around. The octopuses are really dancing. I've seen loads of kind of funny documentaries about how things are, returning to a different light. You're completely right. When I talk about taking more human, it's not. It's the mixture of growing things coming together, the different elements. But I suppose trying to run away from technology, trying to recede from absence of technology, I think is really helpful. And I think watching flowers come out and plants die and grow and bees buzz around them, it's really powerful. Staring outside the window is so important. Whether it's about pregnancy or about cancer or about death or about life, it helps everyone. And I also agree there's nothing greater cure than a young baby to a sick person that can't help but make them smile.
Yeah, the circle of life.
I guess it's interesting how COVID is erupting all this amazing kind of willingness to change, everything from education to how we deal with race to how we deal with poverty, and I guess motherhood, that it hasn't really come to the fore in many ways. But there's no, if everything needs redesigning or an active design focus that I think both your projects do, that there needs to be much more of, then there's no reason why the design of motherhood and maternity also should be something that we think about more closely.
This thing is the hospital as a site for design is very complicated because it's this sort of medical power, and this must be like this. I found it fascinating that now saying that stainless steel is the worst material for COVID. It takes 4 days for the bacteria to die, whereas wood or fabric, paper is 18 to 24 hours, which I find kind of fascinating. It just shows there's so many perceptions on what hygiene is.
Yeah.
I think also that it's really opened up a conversation about certainly the fault lines around where spaces start and stop. So of course we're all working from home, we're all homeschooling and doing all these various things. So place has become an elastic space, if you like. And I would like to think about maternity wards in that way. How can we, moving forward, think about how we keep the outside in and the inside out, so that we are in constant dialogue? Because as I said, I was very keen actually to keep other cultural knowledge within my spaces. I was trying to get my babies to latch on, or thinking about this, that and the other. And I had lots of resource banks around me because I had 2 willing grandmothers, and I would like to think about how we expand our ideas rather than keep them confined within these spaces. I think the Maggie Centre is a great example of that because of the glass and the light and the dialogue with the outside space, but that sets a great tone, I think, for how we might think about those sort of more harmonious relationships.
I think Charles Jenks says it very well in the architecture of hope, I think, which is quite simple and almost humble in its essence.
Well, thank you all for this session.
Thank you. I look forward to meeting you all outside COVID.
Yeah, it will be good, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah,
thank you. Nice to see you all. Yeah.
Happy editing. And if you need any help, then please tell us.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Nice to see you.